Hi, my name's Willie, and I'm going to talk today about The Cape by J.R. Carpenter. This is my video Think Aloud for Dr. Mark Sample's class. Electronic Literature is the class. So just as I get started, I want to focus my discussion a lot on kind of how the story is being unraveled. And we've talked about in the class 5 elements that we need to consider when we're looking at digital literature or electronic literature, depending on your definitional scope of it. So those 5 things are data, process, interaction, surface, and context. So just as I get started here, I've read kind of the introduction of the piece itself by J.R. Carpenter. So from the outset, I know that the photos being presented are government photos from the past. I don't know much more about where they came from, kind of what they were intended for, but I do know that they were government funded, so that gives me context in terms of kind of what is being presented. The flip side of that is how it's being presented. So right from the start, we have this depiction of a house. Looks like a basic black and white drawing overlaid onto a topographical map. So I assume this is Cape Cod. I am not very familiar with the Cape, but it looks like a cape. So this is a reference point location, it says, and it's said to be figure 1. So it says, my grandmother Carpenter lived on Cape Cod in a Cape Cod house. My uncle also lived on Cape Cod, but not in a Cape Cod house. So there's immediately from the outset an uncertainty about what your family life is like. So from now on, I'm just gonna speak as if it's the first person, so I am reading this as if this is my life. So I'm curious as to what my background is. Why are my grandparents divorced? Is my grandfather deceased? And going on to the next one, you can see the text or the pictures moving here. Looks like there's different points of interest with the A and the B. I mean, clearly it's a beach. The only time we went, it was winter, but we walked on the beach anyway. So, kind of wondering why the only time they went was in the winter to grandma's house. Usually you go to grandma's house in the summer. Now you can see a person. Is that grandfather maybe? Kind of hovering around there. So the text itself is interesting. They only went in the winter. Looks like a legend of some sort describing these different geographical locations. It's kind of jolting imagery with panning over the geographical landscape, and now it's back to the beginning. Figure 4, as I alluded to earlier, all of these are just historical photos, black and white photos, that are being used in this piece to tell a story. So it's that narrative element that we've been talking about in class. This really makes me think of the rule of coherence. I'm trying to make sense of all this. Big emphasis on the map, so it's evident that the author, J.R. Carpenter, really wants us to hone in on this story being told on the Cape. But in this slide, I'm seeing what looks like cell towers on the beach. But then there's this whole element of whistling. There's a short audio clip from a Quirks and Quarks on CBC Radio 1. So kind of asking what makes a whistle. And that goes back to the kid talking about his grandfather not really being good with kids, not teaching him how to whistle. Could have been from the Navy, the ingrained kind of militant aspect that, you know, prevents him from relating to kids very much. So here we can see a figure 4 apparently also overlaid on a slightly more rudimentary map of the Cape. It talks about my uncle being in the Navy at one point. He seems to be very militant, doesn't know how to talk to a child. And I wanted to learn how to whistle. Kind of makes you wonder why the kid's parents didn't teach him how to whistle. Again, there's little context surrounding this, so I think the author is leaving you to interpret this how you will. My interpretation is that the boy is sent to his grandparents. It's odd that he's sent in the winter, as I said earlier, rather than the summer. So what I took away from this: focus on topography, geographical features, the landscape photos. It seems less like a story with any sort of pedantic lessons and philosophical takeaways, and more of a way of showing that, you know, if you have these random photographs, I think of, you know, going to like an antique store or something, and sometimes they have old black and white photographs, and it's interesting to think of the story behind that. So you might have, you know, a sailor from the Navy in World War II, and there's no context. There might be a name on the back or, you know, a date, but there's very little insight into what that person, or if it's a landscape photograph, where that is, who that person is. It's kind of that uncertainty that allows you to kind of put your own interpretation into things. For these, there's a corresponding narrative to it, so it definitely steers you in a certain direction. But other than that, it's just a way. I think what J.R. Carpenter is trying to get across is that random photography can be accompanied by a storyline in a digital context, and really his short blips of sentences can really steer your mind into a certain understanding about, or a specific understanding about who this person is, where this is, without any insight or without any prior knowledge of Cape Cod. You might have trouble kind of gathering why this is important, why in the winter, why is he visiting his grandmother, who the uncle is, and kind of where all this stands in the context of the boy's life. So that was my Think Aloud. I hope you enjoyed it, and until next time, so that was my Think Aloud on the Cape by J.R. Carpenter. I hope you enjoyed it and learned a little something. Still trying to figure it out myself, but thanks for watching, and until next time.